Hi, what's up, everybody? Just wanted to talk with you here really quickly and hopefully in a way that's not too groggy or not way too out of it. I was watching just the other day as I was here on YouTube, and I know that there's one of you who recommended that I go take a look over at a video interview that it was John Hernson did with. What Herson rather, the owner of APBA did with I think it was like Saber or something like that, Saber Game, one of these channels. And so I watched it. It was the most recent. I think there were two interviews. It was the most recent of it that I watched him do. There's a lot of really, really good stuff that he mentioned in this interview that I think I want to talk about in the future as we go forward. Just some stuff I thought that would be interesting to just sort of mention and talk about in general. And one of the big things that he talks about here is what he called the cycle of APBA, which I think is actually a cycle that applies to all of us who play these baseball sims, no matter what sim it is that you play. So as I was preparing to start this project, the blog and all this stuff, I started going through the APBA journal. I have the complete APBA journal on PDF. I went through everything that I had. I was looking for different ideas and things like that. And I noticed something that I remember noticing a couple of years ago when I was looking at these old magazines back then, which is that you see a lot of people who start off in the community and then they like disappear. And then it's like 10 years later or so they come back. And then they'll disappear again for a while and then they come back. And each time they come back with more sort of ferocity or more sort of force. So the cycle that Herson was talking about is he says, a lot of these people start off as kids. You're like 7 or 8 years old. You love the game of baseball. You know the players. It used to be in the old days you'd have baseball cards, right? That's how I grew up. When I was 7 or 8, I mean, this was my life. I loved it, and I knew everything. I especially knew a lot about players from like the late 80s because all of the cards I had were from the late 80s because it was the junk wax era. And what other people think is a bunch of trash, for us at the time was everything because those are the cards you could afford. You could still buy packs of like 86 or 87 tops for like 50 cents, at whatever store. It was cheaper than the new stuff. So I'm like, okay, I'll buy that one. I think it looks better anyway, right? So when you're at that age, you can get into games that are like APBA, Strat-O-Matic, or whatever else it is, even Pursue the Pennant, whatever game you enjoy. Because you know the players and you know how the game of baseball works and everything seems to flow naturally. And then it's kind of fun because you can kind of play around with these guys and see in your head what happens. Now, when you're that age, you don't know anything. I mean, I had a old the 1955 R APBA set, as they call it, the one that was reprinted in 1991, 1992, something like that. I would do little projects, but I didn't know anything about pitching rotations. I didn't know anything about like making changing the catcher in and out, giving guys rest and stuff. I would just pick the good players and play and see what happens, right? You start to forget that a little bit later on in your teenage years. I know that happened to me, right? So when I was in middle school, I still played from time to time. I would still, kind of mess around with the cards and stuff like that. But you get into other stuff. You get into girls. I got into computers. I was into emulation for a while. I hung out with my buddies. We played a lot of Magic the Gathering. This is when I was in 8th grade, a little bit into 9th grade. I actually played violin when I was in middle school and in high school. So a lot of people played sports. I actually didn't. I spent my time in the orchestra room playing violin. Loved it a lot. For a while wanted to be a musician, and look at what became of me, huh? But that's kind of what happens. Other things start to take priority in life, and you do things that are more normal, right? Doing whatever it is that other people do. And then they say, well, in college, then you bring it back out. That's what Herson was saying. Now, that happened to me. That happened to me after I got married, right? We got married. I was starting my senior year of college, and I started to get other cards. I think I had one of those APBA boards. I think I had one of the newer ones, one of those ones that I talked about in another video from KB Toys, right? I had a whole bunch of different cards that I got from different places. I think around that time I started to play with NPIII. This would have been around 2006, 2007, something like that. It sounds about right. I also bought my first Strat-O-Matic game there. There was a KB Toys clearance sale online, and so I got the thing for like $5 and then got some of the extra seasons and stuff for like nothing. And I was like, yeah, man, bring it on. I loved it, and I loved playing with it. It does happen when you're in college, but then as John Herson says, then when you establish a family, you start to move away from it again. And it's not that you forget about it, it's that it's a little bit hard because your kids are really young. You got to spend time with them. He says that there are some people, when their kids are like 7 or 8, you bring it out and try to play it with them. I actually didn't have much of a chance to do that. My kids are not really that interested in sports. I mean, like, I don't know, my oldest is into programming, so he and I will talk about like Linux and stuff, right? My middle child, my daughter, she's really interested in drawing. She was showing me all this stuff. I couldn't draw, like, I can't draw like a circle, right? Like, I mean, I'm the wrong guy to, you're like, give me advice about drawing. And I'm sitting here like, you want to talk about like, Harry Patty? I'll tell you about this guy from, who played for the Brooklyn team back in 1908. I'm really interested in him. Anyway, maybe there's a reason why they all think I'm the weird old guy. And then my youngest is interested in playing chess, the 7-year-old, right? So, I mean, it's kind of close, but again, there's not really this sort of baseball thing. I don't know. We don't have TV service, so that's part of it, right? Like, dad's not really watching much sports. I'm trying to create my own crazy stuff with all this, right? So it's different. So, but some people do. Some people will start playing with their kids. That's how I learned APBA. My dad started playing. He was in, I think I said this before, he was in a male league. And my apologies to everybody else who was in the male league, because you probably had me control your team so that my dad didn't have to control both teams by himself, and 7, 8 is it's kind of a good time to start, but it can be difficult to understand what's going on sometimes. Understand why certain things happen, why these players are playing this way, and so on and so forth. And then afterwards, you kind of forget about it again. And then in the end, Herson was saying when you're in retirement, I think it happens to some people before then, but in the end, you get to the point where you're like, you're going to jump in and you're going to jump all the way in. And that's probably for me right now kind of where I'm coming in, saying, all right, well, let's do it. Let's do this, man. We've got a lot to say. We've got a lot to add on. Let's do it. I think of his name is Mike Mateus over at the Replay baseball game forums on Delphi. If you haven't seen this before, you got to check this guy out. This guy's played over 25,000 different individual games of Replay over the last 20 years, a little bit less than 20 years, and he puts his summaries of everything up there. One of my chief inspirations, to be honest with you. But you think, wow, man, how do you get away with all this? And he writes that he's married and he just uses it as a hobby. Spends like 3-4 hours a day playing it, which is much more than I spend doing this. But that's kind of what he does. And, you can do stuff like that, right? At some point in time in your life, you're like, look, I only have so much time left. I want to do something with it. And this is what I want to do. This is what I want to play with. That's the thing. This is the cycle that happens, I think, to everybody who's into this. You can even see it when you look back at people who were involved in creating this stuff, right? So think about Clifford Van Beek, who we've been talking about. Clifford Van Beek finally puts his game out when he's in his late 20s after messing around with it a little bit in his teens, right? At a period in time in which I assume he had a family and was trying to worry about them and was probably trying to figure out a way to make a couple bucks in the Depression. Then the thing didn't work. And then so what happened is he kind of put all that aside for a while. And then he comes back to it, messes around a little bit in the 50s with it, and then, I don't know. But he finally comes back to it again. It's in, I think, 1970 is the way the story goes, where he sees an APBA ad in Baseball Digest magazine and writes in, gets the information, and ends up discovering that all of this looks really familiar. Finally ends up going to an APBA convention. By that time, Van Beek is like 70 years old. It had been like 40 years since he created it all, but you still come back to it, right? You still feel that sort of call, that urge to go back and to try to figure this out again, to try to look at the problems again and see if you can't come up with a solution, right? Same thing happened to J. Richard Sides, right? Played this game as a teenager, played it with his friends, and then put it aside, was always messing around with it, but took him 20 years to really take it seriously and then to realize that there really was a market out there, right? It's that call, it's that magnetism that keeps going after you and keeps dragging you along with it to go different places with it and do stuff with it. It's a real interesting thing. It's a lot of fun. Herson talks in this interview that he did about how it's all about the community and the connections that these that we make with each other that pushes this along. And then he gives a whole bunch of examples of the opposite of why people play on their own, right? There is, I think, a little bit of community there, but I really do think that the thing that really gets us going is, the imagination involved with it and the storylines that come along with this. I know I've said this before, but for me, at least, that's really what it's all about, right? And the combination for me of the story of the replay and the story of the player in real life, especially for guys who are like unknown or who are forgotten, that for me is really what it's all about. I just love that, man. I could spend all day doing that. I probably spend too much time doing that. That's the thing for me, like playing the game. It's fun, it's all right, but the real romanticism of it comes with the research, and it comes with the writing, and it comes with the looking at it, and the imagination, and the thinking about it, and all that stuff. I don't know, it may just be the way that I was raised, right? I was kind of raised on the APBA journal. I remember when I was a kid, this is probably a story I should save for a later video, but I'll tell it to you really quick. When I was a kid, I used to go over to the library, and they had copies of Nintendo Power, right? So that tells you how old I am, right? This was early 90s, and I would read that all the time. My friends and I we couldn't get enough of that. But I used to wish that the library carried copies of the APBA journal. I used to wonder why it didn't, not understanding at that time sort of what the dynamics were, and that this was mostly like a fan-run thing and so on. But I mean, seriously, if they had Nintendo Power, you might as well get the APBA journal, get more people interested and involved with this kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm just happy that these days I can get the full archives and start looking through it. It's just like going back to the library, except I can go back there every day. And I think it was that and being raised on that gets me so excited about, let's look at this project, or let's take a real deep dive and see if we can figure out how this was created, how this is set up and stuff like that. That's where the real fun is for me. Anyway, there's all my rambling for this evening. But yeah, think about that. You can think about your own APBA cycle or your own sports sim cycle, because it doesn't have to be APBA. I think every game is this way, whether card or dice or computer or whatnot. I think that you'll find that there are a lot of stories out there like this. Let me know what yours is. Drop a line in the comments. I will reply to that, and would love to talk with you a little bit more. And I will talk with you more tomorrow about whatever it is I come up with next time. We'll talk with you then. Take care. Bye.